Today's daf is daf Yud Ches, and we're up to Toshma. And we're still in the sugya of the suffix of Rava, and we're trying to be poshet the suffix of Rava from a brisa. Now, we said that on daf Yud Zayin Bebeis, l'Rava pshita le, l'Rava miboyle. So Rabba's shita is that basar meikara is linon. So immediately when he throws whatever he throws, it's considered as if it's already damaged. So let's say, for example, a behema was dores on a kli, and after a certain amount of time, it was nisgalgel, and then it broke. So according to Rabbah, already he's chayiv from the time that he was dores on the kli. But Rava vacillated. Toshma, tarnagolin shahoyu mechatatin bechevel. Now, there's a rope that's attached to a vessel, and this vessel is called a deli. And the tarnagolim, the roosters, are pecking away at this chevel. And v'nifsak hachevel v'nishbar deli. As a result of the action of pecking away at the chevel, the tarnagolim were directly responsible for slicing the rope, and as a result, the deli broke. And this is a case that fits into the suffix of Rava, because if you go basami kara, then you will pay nezek sholem. And indeed, the brisa says, "Mishalmim nezek sholem shmami." No, we see from this brisa that basami kara is lina, that we don't look at the sof maisa, which eventually caused the deli to break, but the tchilas maisa. So from the moment that the tarnagolim or mechatatin were menakrim, and they pecked, they pecked away at the chevel and they cut the chevel, it's as if the kli was already broken, and therefore they have to pay nezek sholem as gufa, but not as tzroros, which is kocha. And the Gemara says tirguma achevel. What the brisa meant when it said that you pay nezek sholem, that means they pay nezek sholem for the chevel. As far as the deli is concerned, it's possible that they only pay chatzi nezek because it's tzroros. So we have no proof from this brisa that basar kara is linon. So the Gemara immediately raises the question of chevel meshunahu. How can you pay nezek sholem for the tarnagolim pecking away and breaking the chevel? That's an unusual kind of a hezek, which falls under keren. And that, as we said many times, is the fundamental, essential difference between regel and keren, whereas regel, or for that matter, shein, is urche b'hachi, it's natural, it's anticipated and normal. But if it's an abnormal behavior, then it comes under keren. And therefore, the maximum amount of money that should be compensated to the nizak by the mazik is only a chatzi nezek, because it's a shartam. And the Gemara answers b'mos belisha, that the chevel was dipped into and coated by an isa, and the isa is now stuck onto the chevel, and we can anticipate, and it's normally behavior that the tarnagolim will try to peck away at the chevel in order to eat the dough that's covering the chevel. So the Gemara asks about nishbar deli katani. How can you tell me that the subject of this brisa is the amount of compensation that the nizak that the masik has to pay the nizak for the chevel, when the brisa mentions the breakage of the deli? And once again, therefore, we have a way of being poshet the suffix of Rava. Ella says the Gemara, this brisa has to be interpreted in the following way: sumchasi. right? We know that Sumchus is the one who holds that Tzroros, you pay Nezek Sholim, the Omer Tzroros Nezek Sholim Mishalim. And Sumchus never had the Halach L'Moshe Sinai of Chatzi Nezek Tzroros. And therefore, you cannot be poshet and come to any conclusion about the vacillation of Rava based on this brisa, because if you hold like Sumchus would say that we go by the Shvir Sakli, and we don't have Meikar Azlina, and nevertheless, in the case of Shvir Sakli, which is Troros and Kocho and not Gufo, you pay Nezek Sholim. In fact, the Gemara is Sumchus. If this brisa is authored by Sumchus, the name is Seifa. What are we going to do to explain the Seifa of this brisa? It says, Nitas mimenu shever. If the kli breaks and one of the pieces of the kli falls on another kli and breaks it, then ala rishon mishalim nezek shalem, ve'ala achma mishalim chatzi nezek. Meaning that the first kli is considered like gufo, and you pay nezek shalem. And once again, we'll have a pshitus for the suffix of rava, and we go basumei kara. But how could it be that on the second kli that's broken, which is tzroros and kocho, you pay chatzi nezek? That's again sumchus. I sumchus mi yislei chatzi nezek. B'chitema, maybe sumchus would agree that when you cut the rope and break the kli, and then the kli shoots out and breaks a second kli, that's chatzi nezek. Why? Shiny le sumchus, Spain nezek kocho, lekoach kocho. Maybe this is not a first degree koach, but rather a second degree koach. And if the kli was broken because of the chevel, that would be kocho. But if the deli breaks and now shoots out to break another kli, that's already koach kocho. When we look at the Tarnagolis and we relate it to the ultimate breakage, it's koach kocho, because it's the behema to the deli, that's kocho, and then from the deli to the second kli, that's also kocho, it's koach kocho. And we don't know exactly what the situation halachically is in koach kocho according to Sumchus. And that was a suffix of Rav Ashi. Velahod boy Rav Ashi, koach kocho l'sumchus ke kocho dami or lavka kocho dami tifshol lake lavka kocho dami. Rav Ashi on Daf Yutes vacillates about the status of koach kocho according to Sumchus. And if you're going to tell me now that this brisa reflects the sheet of Sumchus, and on the second kli that was broken, Sumchus would be moda that you pay only chatzi nezek because koach kocho is not the same as kocho, then why did Rav Ashi have this suffix, this doubt? And therefore the Gemara says, let's reject the possibility of interpreting this brisa according to Sumchus, elalav rabbanani. And once again, if it's the rabbanon, you see that you pay for the shviras hadli nezek sholem. Why? Because the deli itself is considered gufo and not tzroros and not kocho. And that's based on the tchilas hamaisa, basumei kara azlina. And the Gemara rejects it. Amar Abivi bar Abaye, de ka'azl minei minei. The Bryce is talking about a scenario, not where the Tarnagoles pecked away at the chevel until the deli fell and broke, but rather that after the rooster was pecking away at the chevel, then the rooster continued to push the deli with its body. So it's almost as if the Tarnagoles did a gymnastic twirl in the sky, and what it did was it cuts the rope in half. Now the deli is sort of hanging, and now what happens is the Tarnagolas pushes the deli with its body until it breaks the deli, and that's considered gufo, and therefore you pay nezek shalim, but it has nothing to do with the suffix of rava with regard to kolcho or tzroros. Boy rava, another suffix of rava, chatzi nezek tzroros mi gufo mishalim or me aliyah mishalim. Mi gufo mishalim to lo ashkan chatzi nezek mishalim me aliyah, o dilma me aliyah mishalim to lo ashkan ka orche to mishalim me gufe. So Rava vacillates about the following issue. We know that tzoros generates a chiyuv of chatzi nezek. And what that means is that you pay, in a case of chatzi nezek migufa, which means that the maximum amount of compensation that the nizak will receive from the mazik is the value of the mazik itself. So, for example, if let's say the shor tam is worth 100, that's the maximum that the mazik will have to pay to the nizak. And therefore, shall we assume that since in the case of tzroros you pay chatzi nezek, then what we have to have is a ceiling amount of money that you pay, and that's called migufa. We never found a chatzi nezek that pays min aliyah, meaning above and beyond the value of the mazik. Or should we say no? That in this case, since it's urche, meaning this is not an unusual kind of behavior, and it falls under regel, and in the case of regel, you always pay me'aliyah. You pay not limited by the value of the mazik, but even mibeso. Toshma, hidus eno muad, v'yesh omrim hidus harezem muad. What's hidus? Hidus means that the Tarnagolas was jumping on top of a kli and broke the kli. And according to the Yesh Omrim, that's called muad. So the Gemara asks, hidus desal kedaitach, is it literally that the Tarnagolas was jumping on top of the kli? How do we understand the Tana Kamma that says Eino Muad and you don't pay Nezek Sholem? This is Urche. This is a normally anticipated behavior pattern. It's not a Shinui. Elalav, therefore, we have to assume that we have to add a piece to this brisa. And what is that piece? Hidus Vehitis. It's not only that the animal was jumping on top of this kli and broke it, but rather a piece from the kli shot off and hit something else and broke that something else. No, why don't we assume that the machlokas between the Tanakam and the Yesh Omrim in this price is indeed the suffix of Rava? Demand the Omar Eno Muad, according to the Tanakam who says Eno Muad, Kasavar Migufa Mishalem. He holds that Chatzi Nezek Tzroros, like any other Chatzi Nezek, is limited to Gufo. Whereas Oman di Omer, but the Yesh Omrim in this brisa that hold Hareze Muad, it means Muad Kasavar Me'aliyah Mishalim. That Chatzi Nezek Tzroros is Muad because it's a normal behavior pattern, it's Urche, it's Muad, and therefore you pay Me'aliyah. So the suffix of Rava depends upon this Machlokas Tanoim as recorded in the Bryce. And the Gemara says, lo. The Gemara rejects it. Perhaps the Machlokas between the Tanakama in the case of Hidus Vehitis and the Yesh Omrim is identical with Sumchus and Rabbanan, which means that according to the Tanakama, like the Rabbanan, you only pay Chatzi Nezek because of Chatzi Nezek Toros, which is Hilchos HaGemirale. Whereas, according to the Yesh Omrim, when he says Havi Muad, he's holding like Sumchus, that the din of Chatzi Nezek Toros is equal to the din of Shar Muad, and you pay Nezek Shalom because Sumchus never accepted the Halacha Moshe Sinai. Toshma, maybe I could be poshet the suffix of Rava from the Mishnah on Daf Chof Aleph and Beis. Hakelev shenot al charora. Charora, as we said in the past, is a hot cookie that was grilling over the coals, and the kelev picked up this uga, and with it took up some of the coals. Holach legodish. Now the kelev with the charor in its mouth and holding gecholim moves over to the haystack of yenom. Ochel charora. The kelev devours the hot grilled cookie, and with the gecholim lights afire the haystack of yenom. And the Mishnah paskins the following: Al acharora mishalim nezik shalom, v'al agodish mishalim chatzi nezik. It would seem that the charora is called gufo because the animal ate the charora, and therefore it's shein, and shein pays nezik shalom. But the godish is already tzroros. Why? Because it's not a direct hezek on the part of the kelev, but rather the kelev carried the gecholim, put down the gecholim on the haystack, and the gecholim burnt the haystack. So that's only kocho and not gufo of the kelev, and therefore you pay chatzi nezek. My timer lav mishum dahavilut soros. Why does he pay for the godish only chatzi nezek? It's called kocho and not gufo. And we see, therefore, that Tani Allah, there's a Tosefta that embellishes this Mishnah, and it says, Mishalem chatzi nezek migufo, that the Baal HaGacheles, or perhaps the Baal HaKelev, will pay like a short tam migufo. So you see that in a case of tzroros, you only pay migufo. So Gemara asks and raises the following objection to this proof: V'tizra, are you of the opinion that you can interpret this brisa and the Mishnah that the brisa is interpreting, that you pay chatzi nezek because it's tzroros of regel? We find that the brisa, or I believe it's the Mishnah. One second, just give me a second here. Okay, I believe it's the Mishnah quotes Rabbi Elazar, and he rejects the sheet of the Tanna Kamma. He holds that for the Sreifas HaGodish, the Baal HaKelev pays nezek sholem, but he only pays me gufa. So if you're telling me that we're talking about tzroros of regel, then nezek sholch migufa miashkechan, do we ever find a precedent in the world of regel where you're limited to migufa? Regel by definition pays min aliyah. So we can't suggest that interpretation that we're talking about chatzi nezek tzroros of regel, and then turn around and see that the Mishnah says you pay me gufo. There's no such thing as paying regel me, nezek shalom of regel mi gufo. It's always min aliyah. And even Sumchus, who holds that chatzi nezek tzroros, you pay nezek shalom, nevertheless, you don't pay mi gufo, you pay min aliyah, mi abayis. Ella, therefore, we have no choice but to assume that the chiv tashlumin here on the haystack is not because of regel, but rather kagon deshani baha begacheles. This is called a shinu. It's unusual, and we don't anticipate that a kelev would take a gacheles, and in its mouth it has both a charora and a gacheles, and it would drop and place down the gacheles on top of the godish. That's why the Tanna Kamma holds that you pay chatzi nezek because of Karen, because it's lav urche, it's shanile, and therefore, according to the Tanna Kamma, you pay chatzi nezek of shor tam. Rabbi Loz, on the other hand, holds Sovelek Rabbi Tarfon, the Omer Meshuna Karen, but Chatzar Nizak Nezik Shalom Mishalim. We have the sheet of Rabbi Tarfon later on in Daf Chav Dalid that Karen Tama, if it was a hezek in the Chatzar of the Nizak, you pay Nezik Shalom. And therefore, the Bala Kelev has to pay Nezik Shalom on the Godish that was burnt down, the haystack, which was in the Chatzar of the Bala Godish. So now we see that there's machlokas tanoim in the din of tzroros of Keren Tama. This has nothing to do with nizkei tzroros of regel, and therefore you cannot shed any light on Rava's suffix with regard to tzroros shel regel, whether or not you pay me gufo or min aliyah. And the Gemara rejects it, Elohi. There's no need to interpret that machlokas in Tanakama Rabbi Lazar is about this issue, as we had suggested, but rather we're going to go back to explain that we're talking about nizkei tzoros shel regel. If that be the case, my time of mukmis law, Rabbi Tarfon, what forced you to that position that we're talking about nizkei keren, and therefore Belazar holds like Rabbi Tarfon, mishum nezik sholem, because you had a problem. How could it possibly be that according to Rabbi Belazar, he pays nezik sholem migufo if we're talking about regel Torah shel regel? No question, no problem. Why? Because Rabbi Belazar sovek his sumchus, the Omer Torah is nezik sholem mishalim, but at the same time that Rabbi Belazar agrees to sumchus with regard to chatzi nezik sholem mishalim, but sover look Rabbi Yehuda the Omar sad tamus bimkomo medus. So this is the sheet of Rabbi Yehuda on Daf Memhem base. I call it, I don't know, this doesn't help you, but it helps me, the schizophrenic shita of Rabbi Yehuda, which means that in Tashlumi Nezek, in the case of Keren, you can split it in half. You can say that when the shar becomes a shar muad, it doesn't strip itself of its original status as a shar tam, meaning shar tam pays chatzi nezek. Now that it becomes a muad, on top of the chatzi nezek of a shar tam, it pays another chatzi nezek midin shar muad, but it retains its status vis-a-vis the first half of nezek as a shar tam. And then afkamina is going to be migufo min aliyah. So chatzi nezek is going to pay only migufo because this shar is a shar tam that only pays migufo. The second chatzi nezek, which is added because the shar is now a shar muad, that's payable even mibesa. So Rabbi Lazar holds like sumchus, but he also holds like Rabbi Yehuda. And therefore, when the Bailam pay nezek sholem for nizkei tzrora shel regel, because we accept the shita of sumchus, but you pay it midin shar amuad, but still the first half and the chatzi nezek is only collectible migufo midin shar tam. It's only the second half from 50 to 100%, that increment, which is the shar muad increment, that pays mi besa. V'chi katani. And when the Brisa says, or I should say the Mishnah says that according to Rabbi Lazar you pay me gufo, he's referring to the tzad tamus, to the half a nezek that's generated by the tzad tamus, because even though it's a muad, nevertheless, because again we're going like sumchus that chatzi nezek tzroros like a shar muad pays nezek shalom, but even on that muad half above the first half, that you pay me beso, that's not mafkia the first half, that is mitzad the tamu shabo, which only pays me gufo. So when it says me gufo mishalim, he's talking about the tzad tamus. And the Gemara rejects it. Olei Rav Sama Breder Rav Ashi Ravina Eimer Deshamet Leil Rav Yehuda b'tzad tzad tamus b'mkomo mez. When, in what situation do we? Bitam v'nasa muad. It was once a shar tam, and even though it became a muad after doing this negicha 3 times, or whatever behavior pattern it was 3 times, then Rabbi Yehuda says that the original status of this animal as a shartam regarding machzis min tashlum and remains in place. But b'muad mitchilaso mishametle